So, in the past year, I turned 30, quit my job, and moved to Paris, all because of a world pandemic and the sky turning orange in California. Well, not the 30 part, that was inevitable, but everything else. They say your 20s are a time for exploring, trying new things, going new places, and I definitely did that. I had an incredible 20s. I lived in 6 different US states, I had 2 different careers, and I even lived on a ship for a little bit. It was a really exciting time, and I learned a lot, and I got to do a lot of different things. But then something happened right before I hit 30. I started to feel all of a sudden like I was running out of time, that I'd kind of made my choices and I was stuck with them, and I wasn't the only one. I started to hear my friends say things like, oh, if I was younger, I'd do that, or oh, I'm too old to do that now. And this is something I'd heard from people in their 40s and 50s in my life before, but to see my friends and myself start thinking that way, I started to wonder, where was this coming from? Where is this pressure to have this sort of arbitrary threshold where at the age of 30, we decide that it's too late, we're stuck, can't start over, you're kind of settled in with the choices you've made. And a lot of that is because I think we've created this arbitrary threshold that 30, there's a certain life path, and there's certain milestones you need to hit before you hit 30. And if you do, you're doing great, you've had a wonderful life, and if you don't, you've somehow failed. And I wanted to understand where that came from and what that pressure is, where the origin of that pressure is. So some quick background to explain how I got here. Graduated from the University of Virginia, moved out to Colorado, and I did Teach for America. I taught first grade for 2 years. Teach for America, they send you to sort of an underserved public school. You teach for 2 years, and I said, this will be a great opportunity. My brother and I were the first people in my family to really go off to college. A lot of it had to do with my teachers. Great opportunity to pay it forward. I was in my 20s. I was figuring it out. At the end of the 2 years, I realized teaching was not what I wanted to do long term. I really think you have to be a saint to be a teacher. And I decided to make a pretty big career shift and pursued becoming an officer in the U.S. Coast Guard. I'd studied foreign affairs as an undergrad. I thought I wanted to work in intelligence, and so I said, hey, the military is going to be a great experience. I'll learn a lot personally, professionally. I knew it would be way outside my comfort zone, and I said, this is going to be great. I'm in my 20s. I'm figuring it out, but this is going to get me to where I want to be. And it was an experience. I ended up stationed on a ship for 2 years. And to give you an idea of how much I knew, I showed up on the first day and they welcomed me on the ship and they pointed at something and said, do you know what that is? And I said, no. They said, that's a compass. And I said, roger that, off to a great start. So there were days and days where I was floating out in the middle of the ocean trying to learn how to navigate a ship. And I would stare out and the sky is beautiful, full of stars, wondering how in the world I had ended up in this situation. How did I go from teaching first grade to being on a ship in the middle of the ocean? What I really wanted to be doing was working in intelligence. But I kept telling myself, no, this is all going to work out. We're going to get there. You work hard through this. You're going to get to where you want to be eventually. You're on the path. You're moving forward. And it all seemed to work out. At the end of the ship, I was 28 years old. And I got stationed as an intelligence officer, and I thought, finally, I'm there. I got where I wanted to be, moved out to California, and I hated it. I really didn't enjoy being an intelligence officer. I didn't like working in that environment. And I kept trying to convince myself, no, this is normal. You're in a new place again. You're just figuring things out. But the more time I spent, the harder it got to ignore how unhappy I was and how much I felt like I wasn't in the right place doing the right thing. But I kept trying to shove those emotions and feelings down, keep my eye on the path. I was going to move forward no matter what. And then, as we all know, a world pandemic hit, and like many of you, I had a lot of time to sit and think about what I was doing in my life, the choices I was making, where I wanted to be, and I started to get a little bit panicky. I felt like I'd run out of time all of a sudden and it was too late. I was stuck on this path that I'd carved out for myself starting at 22, and that was kind of it. And I said, we're all just stuck in our apartments. Of course we're thinking this way. You're just trapped in your own head. It's gonna get better. But lucky for me, I was living in California at the time, and the sky turned orange, like bright, apocalyptic orange. The wildfires out there got so bad one day that the sky turned this color, and this is about 10 a.m. in the photograph. And I remember opening the curtain that day and just looking out, and it was the eeriest, strangest morning you can imagine, and no one could concentrate. It very much felt like the end of the world. At any moment, I expected zombies to come running at me, and I didn't expect to survive. I thought that was it. And I buttoned up my uniform that day, and I was looking at myself in the mirror, and I thought, I don't even recognize myself anymore. I don't want to be doing this. This isn't where I want to be. And a voice was screaming in my ear, you have to make a change. You have to do something different. This isn't who you are. This isn't what you want. But there's another voice in my ear. It was pretty quiet, but powerful, saying, ooh, but you're 29, almost 30. Is this really the time to be making another big transition, another change? But it really, something about the sky turning orange, feeling like the end of the world, feeling this overwhelming sense of existential dread makes some things pretty impossible to ignore. So that sense of unease, that sense of uncertainty sharpened into this unavoidable realization that I was not in the right place doing the right thing. So that day, I sat down at my desk and I searched how to separate from the military and graduate school programs in Europe to become a journalist. I'd always wanted to move to Europe and I'd always wanted to be a journalist, but because of financial reasons, that never seemed feasible. A couple months later, moved out of my apartment, sold nearly everything I owned, quit my job, said goodbye to my friends in California, and started my move to Paris, where I am today. And I really couldn't be happier with that choice. I feel more aligned with myself than I have in ages, but along the way, I realized just how much this societal pressure exists to follow a certain path and to hit certain milestones by a certain age. And if you don't, you start to feel anxious. And I wanted to understand where that pressure came from. So how many of you have seen one of those awful 30 under 30 lists? It shows people under the age of 30 who have done incredible things, and you start to wonder, like, what have I been doing lately? Oh yeah, me too. And then here's another fun one, the ultimate guide to life. These are 25 milestones and the ages at which you should hit them. So this is based on an interview from about 2,000 people in the UK, ages 16 to 75, and they were asked, when should you accomplish certain goals? So you'll notice you're going to rent on your own at 24, and a year later you're going to rent with a partner and get engaged, married by 28, first kid by 30. There's a gray space between 39 and 60 where I guess you're doing something, and then at 60 you're over. It's done. You're kind of coasting for the rest of your life, maybe playing some golf, which doesn't bode well for me because I don't like golf and I'm not very good at it. And I can look at this chart and I can tell you this is ridiculous. This isn't how life plays out. Life is unpredictable. It zigs and it zags, and you're in a first grade classroom and then all of a sudden you're in the middle of the ocean on a ship. But I still feel anxious when I look at this. I still feel like maybe I'm doing something wrong. Maybe these people know something that I don't. And I hated that. I hated that pressure I felt, even when looking at this, knowing it's ridiculous, still feeling some tiny seed of confusion and doubt in what I was doing. So I wanted to understand where that pressure came from, and here's a study from the Stanford Center on Longevity. So basically the ideal timing of milestones, and this is by age group. So you have folks age 75 and plus, ages 25 to 34, sort of when they think they should be hitting certain milestones. And you'll notice it's remarkably consistent over the generations. The actual timelines haven't shifted that much of when people expect to do certain things. But if you look at this chart, the percentage of Americans, for example, actually achieving those milestones has dropped drastically. So married by 27, almost 80% of folks in the 75 plus range were getting married by 27. Folks in the 25 to 34 age range, that's dropped to 35%. So the timelines have remained the same, but the reality isn't matching up at all. And so to zoom in a little bit more, so yep, the ideal age to marry, 27, that's happening closer to 29, buy a home. I think we all know that's a struggle for people our age. The ideal average age is considered to be 27, that's happening closer to 34. So we're feeling a lot of pressure to meet these goals, even knowing that the reality isn't matching up with the ideal. And in an interview with the BBC, an occupational therapist named Charlotte Housden called this the tyranny of the should. Sort of this idea of what we should be doing. We live under this anxiety that somehow we're failing if we're not meeting these goals. And that comes from a lot of different places. The language you hear in your family, movies, TV shows, music. Implicitly and explicitly, we're constantly being exposed to these messages that there's a right way to do things. There's a right way, there's a linear path, and we need to follow it. Now, that's not to say that milestones are a bad thing. They structure our life, they give it meaning. Getting married, having a career, those are all wonderful things. But it's this timeline attached to it that's really toxic and can cause a lot of issues. It can increase depression and anxiety, it can exacerbate mental health issues. And especially if you tie it to your self-worth, that can have some really negative repercussions, because if you hit 30 and you haven't checked these 3 boxes, you start to feel as though you failed, and you start to feel as though you've run out of time. Even me, someone at the age of 29, I was happily single. But then right before 29, I started to think, am I becoming one of those spinsters everyone talks about? And I could laugh and say, oh my God, that's ridiculous. Where is it coming from? But the thought was there, and I wanted to understand why. So I started to notice how people reacted to when I turned 30. A couple different things. My uncle, for example, cracked a joke about how no one would want to marry a 30-year-old. And then sometimes folks would say things along the lines of, you know, you look really young for your age. Their jaws would drop, their eyes would open, as if somehow a 30-year-old is supposed to be on death's door and to look quite old and haggard. And I'll be the first person to say I kind of liked when that happened at first, because I was like, I felt like I was cheating the system somehow. Like, look at me, I'm doing great. But the more it happened, the more I realized, what does it say about society, and what does it say about how we view aging? Especially for women who feel an increased pressure to look young, have a partner, and to be professionally successful all at the same time. And so one thing that bothered me more than that was the reaction to me shifting, taking another zig in my career path and going to get my master's. Reactions range from, wow, you're so brave, to, are you worried about being the oldest person in your class? Which I hadn't been until they started mentioning it over and over again. But it was kind of this idea, and it made me tremendously sad that we think at the age of 30 you're done and you can't try new things and you can't go new places. And if that's what's happening at 30, what is happening to folks in their 40s and 50s and 60s, where they feel trapped and they feel like they can't make different choices? And so I think it's time, as a society, we forget about this age-based timeline. We take that pressure off of ourselves. And I think we're starting to see a shift in that mentality. And strangely enough, we have a world pandemic to thank for that. So in this open-ended response about how the COVID-19 pandemic affected people's lives, of course people face some seriously negative impacts. And I want to note that not everyone had the privilege and time and resources to think and reflect on their lives. COVID-19 absolutely exacerbated existing structural inequalities. But for a lot of people, COVID-19 had this unexpected silver lining where they started reevaluating their life and looking at their relationships and their jobs. And a lot of people, weirdly enough, kind of had to face their own mortality for the first time and think, is this how I want to live my life? Am I living it in a way that truly aligns with who I am and what I want? And I think the more people who start to think like this, and the more people who start to consciously look at their choices, it's going to become more and more socially acceptable for people at any age to reevaluate, to start over, to move somewhere new, to shake the system up a little bit. And so the unpredictability and uncertainty that came with COVID also presents this incredible opportunity for society to reevaluate the way we approach this timeline, which I think is really exciting and an incredible chance for everyone to really make those conscious decisions. So if you want to get married and have kids and retire, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Go for it. But I want to challenge this idea of achieving things by a certain age as being a definer of success. And I know it sounds logical. And again, we can all look at it logically and say, I know by 30 I don't have to have these things done, but that pressure exists. And I think the more we alleviate that pressure, we're going to release ourselves from the tyranny of the should. And we're going to ask ourselves questions. Why am I in this job? Is it making me happy? Do I want to get married? Do I want to have kids? If so, why? What is the driving force behind that? Is it something that truly aligns with me and what I want in my life? Or is it what I think society tells me I should want? And so a year ago, I was sitting in a military uniform, incredibly unhappy, and had this incredible opportunity to shake things up and change my life because I was able to start questioning that path and whether it was something that I really wanted. And even though I'm not standing here saying I'm without anxiety, I'm without doubt, that absolutely still exists in my heart, in my body. But I'm more confident than ever that I'm on a path that is one that I've defined rather than one that society has defined for me. Thank you.